Origami, Honkai Star Rail, Mr. Pokke. This is going to be the most fun collaboration on my channel to date. Genuinely, the most fun. Let's go.
All this origami, all this origami, all this origami got me going kamikaze now.
So who's Mr. Pokke and what's Honkai Star Rail? Mr. Pokke is a top 0.01% streamer for the game Honkai Star Rail, and he's innovated guide making with CN analysis and has provided an infinite amount of entertainment with other creators through things like tier list yapping and account audits. Speaking of which, my account might be an interesting one to audit. Okay, but what does that have to do with me and Origami? Well, I can do something that he can't. I can take his favorite character from the game, Tingyun, and bring her to the real world with Origami. Let me show you exactly how I do that. So for starters, this is what Tingyun looks like, and we can definitely turn her into Origami. So let's start designing. Now this is a software that lets me draw lines so I can map out the structures easily on a grid. And this is going to be really fast, so a lot of it might not make sense, but we can extrapolate Tingyun into a stick figure based on her details, as well as plan for color changes, which in this case, she's going to be tan on one side and then brown for her hair color on the other side of the paper. So designing will compensate for that too. So the extrapolated stick figure can kind of look like this, where these are her legs, this middle area is for her tail, and actually for her clothes, in addition to some of these drapes, which the long ones are actually connected to her arms. Here's her arms. We have the most important part, her ears, the face, and also her hair, which you can't see here, but it's a ponytail. And so from something like this that lies along the grid of the stick figure, we can then map it onto the square grid that represents our paper. So mapping these are fairly straightforward at the beginning. Longest is in the corner, so we can copy our legs, which are 7 grid units tall, like this, and that represents one leg. So I can block it out like that, and that's how we know there's one leg, and vice versa if we start to add some of the other flaps like this. And so we can just continue to fill in the rest of the flaps. And since I have a lot of experience, I kind of know what works for each flap and how much space they take. While the beginning was easy, the upper part starts to get a little bit more complicated. We have this zigzag pattern for where the space of our body is. In addition, we have the head right in the middle next to this body. I've done this with a similar design for Kafka, so that's kind of how I know what's going to happen. And now we just have to fill the rest of this space with the arms. But it looks really asymmetric and kind of weird, and that's just the tricky part of designing. Alright, so I know this doesn't make too much sense now, but I can at least point out which part is which. So starting from the bottom, we have her legs, and then this whole section is the dress details. Here we have the tail and additional dress details. This part is her body, and then up here we have the face and upper torso. And then on the side we have the disconnected sleeves, and then her hand. And this area becomes her hair, which the top part is her ears, and then her bangs. So yeah, that's all the points. And let's do a test fold to see if this actually works. All right, so before we test fold, you might be wondering, boys, how does this turn into anything? And the real crease pattern filled in kind of looks more like that, where each of these lines represents folding one way or the other way, and it'll collapse all the way down into, ideally, our Tingyun. So I worked this out with the crease pattern, and if I unfold it a little bit, you can kind of see how this works. So here we are, and you can see how the alternating creases compresses together, and we have all these different structures that kind of look like the crease pattern we were looking at before. Just like that. And here we can have our legs, right? The parts of our dress like this. And from this test fold, I now have confidence that this structure should work. We just need a lot bigger paper. Like this Tingyun is barely the size of my hand, and it's going to be really hard to shape her to look good. So speaking of paper, let's get some fancy stuff. This is a kozo and hemp paper from Kochi, Japan. It costs 40 bucks a roll. It's 4 times thinner than A4 paper and perfect for folding super complex origami. I'm going to combine this extraordinary paper with a brown paper for Tingyun's hair. And I'm using none other than tissue paper. Yeah, ordinary tissue paper. But trust me, the combination of the two will be stellar. To combine it, I'm using a totally non-sus powder mixed with water to do something called paper sizing. This will stiffen the paper fibers together to make one crispy paper. This is super effective and common practice for complex origami and works on nearly every type of paper to make it origami worthy. I have tutorials on this if you want to try yourself. And voila, the thin fancy paper allows some of the brown to creep through to make a skin tone, while the other side is a deep chocolate that matches Tingyun's hair. Let's trim this into an 80 by 80 centimeter square and get folding. Ooh, that peel was amazing, right? Who knew paper could be so satisfying? And now, it's time to do the actual origami part, folding the paper. I first crease in the lines I made from the crease pattern and then get to collapsing the paper into its base. Generally, I can fold it into a big stick and then stretch the paper outwards along the pre-creases I made. I'm then folding out the bottom details first, then the middle, and lastly the top. Although it's kind of sequential, the folding process is not what you think. It's a repetition of folding, then unfolding, then refolding things back, and then punching the paper, then massaging it, then flipping it inside out, and finally squeezing everything back into place. Blood, sweat, and tears. The past minute of this video was like 5 hours of folding straight. Now that she's just about collapsed, I can start folding some details such as her face and neck. Well, right now she doesn't look like much, but I'm gonna fix that. This next stage is my favorite part of origami, shaping.
皆さん、いい腕前ですね。
Shaping in origami transforms the structure of folds into something beautiful. How? Well, remember that totally non-suspicious powder we used to make the paper? It can also be used for something called wet folding. While paper is wet, you can change its memory for when it dries. This allows the origami to even fight gravity. And the best thing is that if I mess up, I can just re-wet and refold the mistake. And yes, that happens a lot to get the perfect result. It's common for shaping to take longer than all the steps before it. The last 10% of the origami takes me 90% of the time. And that is how I made Tingyun.
万事順調。天の地域をもって鼓舞を。天の地域をもって鼓舞を。
So, what'd you think? Did you learn something new about origami? Is Tingyun the best 4-star harmony? Is she still alive? Well, let me know down in the comments below. Go subscribe to Mr. Pokke. Mr. Pokke, if you're watching this, you should have your hands on your Tingyun. I hope you enjoy. Everyone go do some push-ups, and I'll see you in the next video.
All this origami, all this origami, all this origami got me going kamikaze now.